Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Tzadik Aleph and Bava Kamos. We learn for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael and the Sunnah Basar V'Shivya. We're down to about 10 lines down of the page at the two dots. Yiboilu Yesh Omed L'Zaken or Ein L'Zaken. In other words, when a person, a defendant, is prosecuted in the Jewish court, and to determine, but let's say he's a murderer, so you have to determine, did he use a proper, what was the item that was used to kill him, right? The weapon, was that considered, was that killable or not? In other words, if a person, let's say, says, well, I threw an empty plastic bag at him and I killed him. Obviously that wouldn't, or not that he testified by himself, as witnesses said that wouldn't be enough for murder. He must have died of a heart attack. You can't say, I blew in his face and he died, so I killed him. No, there has to be an assessment made to determine if he was killed based on did the murderer kill him. The pasuk says, Even Yad Asher Yomos Bo Hiko. It's got to be like with a stone that's possible, some sort of a weapon, a gun or whatever, a knife that could be capable of being killing. That's when it comes to murder. What about when it comes to damages? When it comes to damages, do we also say, let's check out the weapon and see, could this have done the damage or not? Or do we say, no matter what, it's very possible that damage can be done even if it can't be properly assessed. We don't check it to see if this weapon could have done the damage or not, because any little thing could be damaged. Any amount, anything could be damaged. So that's the question. Do you need an assessment when it comes to damages? Or do we not make an assessment? As long as the witnesses say this guy did this to this guy and did damage, we accept that. Meaning, when it comes to murder, we determine, well, can the person have been killed with this weapon or not? If it's not a murder weapon, you can't say, I killed him with a piece of paper. That's not a murder weapon. There you need an assessment. When it comes to damages, anything could be, you don't need an assessment. He did a damage, anything could have been, even a small thing could have gone damages. We don't make an assessment. Is there no difference between murder and damages? Tashma. Bring with me a bor. It's just like a boar. In order to kill, so the pasuk says if you keep the chishbor, the nafal shama shor o chamor, and a shor chamor fell in there, an animal fell in there and was killed. The boar has to be deep enough to kill him, asar tfachim, which is a standard bore. If it was less than 10 tfachim and the animal fell in there and died, we don't assume that it was the boar that killed him. It's got to be enough to kill him, asar tfachim. Let's say it was less than 10 tfachim deep, but you're potter because the boar didn't kill him. The animal may have had a heart attack or whatever. But if he was damaged by the fall, even if it was less than 10 tfachim, you're chayev. My loving matal doesn't mean this. When he says if it's less than 10 tfachim, even if it's one tefach, if he fell in there, an animal fell into a boar that was one tefach deep, very little, it's almost like just a little tripping, not very like a step, a small step. He fell in there, was only a tefach. He'd be chayev for nesikin. That would indicate that even a koldu, even any amount, you don't have to have an assessment. Could have animal been damaged by such a small fall of a little step like a tefach? Mashma that you don't need it. It's what he said. If it's from 1 to 10 tefachim deep, up until 20 tefachim, right? Misa, like there's no misa, but in a zakenika. But there is damages, alma, and a zaken koldu. Any amount. You could have damaged by tripping on a little step. That could have done damage. You can't say, is that enough to have done damage? You have a step outside. A guy trips on the step. Is that enough to do damage? Anything could have comes to damage. When it comes to murder, no. But when it comes to damage, any amount. So you see that you don't need an assessment when it comes to damage. This Gemara says low. He's going not from 1 to 10, but rather he's going down from 10. What does that mean? If it's 10 tefachim deep, that would cause death of an animal, right? We said, remember, shor doesn't apply to a person. A person should check where he's going. But asar for an animal that fell in there, 10 tefachim deep would cause death. If it's less than tefachim purta, if it's only 9.5 tefachim or 9.9 tefachim, nizakin isam isaleka. There is no that wouldn't cause death, but it was cause damage. It has to have. It's got to be some depth to it. If it was only a tefach deep, maybe that anything would cause. You don't need no assessment there. You can't assess that. That's like anything could cause damage. And each and every item, and you need enough to do damage. In other words, could be that even when it comes to damages, there must be an assessment. Was this obstacle or weapon, whatever it was, is that enough to cause the damage or not? You need an assessment. But if it's a tiny thing, maybe like where one tefach, which wouldn't cause damage, maybe you wouldn't be chayev on that. So Tashma, again, another proof. Let's say you hit him on his eye. Someone blinded him. or Alazno, or you hit him on his ear and you deafened him. Ever Yosef ben Lecheres, and Ever goes out free. So I say shame with his eye, even the ear is also Rosh Evarim, not shame Ayin that says in the pasuk, but we learn out the other 24 Evarim also. Ever Yosef ben Lecheres. But let's say he just hit him near his eye, like opposite his eye on the wall, neck of his, he can't see now, or connected also or near his ear, he can't hear. He doesn't go out free. My time love should be in room because it must be because you need an assessment. And if you didn't hit him directly on the eye, you hit him near his eye. Maybe you hit him you knocked him against a wall near his eye or something of that sort. That's not enough to do damage because you need an assessment. And the assessment here says that's not enough to do damage. It shows that you need an assessment, even for damage as well. Because we say over there, he frightened himself. In other words, the reason we say if you hit him on his eye, okay, you cause direct damage. If you hit him near his eye, you banged the wall right near his eye, you took a hammer and blew it right near his eye, right near his ear, he himself caused it by being frightened. That caused him to have the hearing or the vision loss. Right. If you scare somebody, let's say you just say boo, you scare the heck out of them, right? You really put the on him because he didn't cause any direct damage, but you're still a bad boy. You should make amends with him. Kate, so what's an example? Talk about, let's say you blew into his ear and you deafened him. You're potter. You didn't touch him directly. Also, but if you grabbed him and you held him, we talk about something, and you blew, then you're chayav. Why? Because in one case you say you scared him, it caused his own damage. By being frightened, you caused his damage. He didn't have to be frightened. I know if somebody comes over to me and taps me on my back, I get scared. I don't know what's going on. Like you get nervous, right? People have different measures of sensitivity. Yeah. Right. It's at least it's a contributing factor. And as we said, like you're hiding Dan Shemaim, you still were a bad boy. You caused him some damage. But he did part of it was his own sensitivity. So that's what we're saying over here too. So not because you need an umdana. You say if you hit him on his eye, then you have to pay. If you didn't hit him on his eye directly, you don't have to pay. And Mashma, that you make an assessment, did you do the damage or not? No, not because of that, simply because when you didn't hit him directly, his own sensitivity contributed to the damage, and therefore you're not chayav b'dinei adam. So again, we can prove it. Tashma, but here we're proving chamisha dvarim. The 5 things that you have to pay for damages when a person damages another person. Remember, not an animal. Animal only pays nezik, but the person pays 5 things. Nezik, sari, pesheves, and boshes. Chamisha dvarim omdenoso. They are assessed, but no slow miyad, and you give it to him everything. Ripui pesheves hachisrap. In other words, you pay him for everything, including the doctor's bills, the hospital bills, and the time off from work until he gets healthy. Meaning, the other things you say, nezek, tsar, and boshes, that you can say, what is that worth right away? Okay, that's the you cause him to be devalued to the tune of $100,000. You give him the money right away. The repo and the shevas takes time, right? It takes time to get healed. It takes time to be off from work. So you have to give him enough to last until he gets due. Some don't have to hear so, but we could say it. Due. Let's say they assessed him that all these damages worth, let's say, $10,000. But then after the $10,000 was used up on the doctors and the loss of time from work, he continued to deteriorate. Well, you only give him as much as the assessment was made. They had a professional assessment, doctors or whatever, and that's it. If he himself continued to get worse afterwards, it's probably his own problem. Let's say they assessed him that they're going to give him, let's say, 10 weeks of pay and 10 weeks in the hospital. And he got better before that. He improved before that. He recovered. No slow kamashim, you still give him everything. Why? We'll see why the Gemara is going to explain in a minute. Because Min HaShamayim, he got a gift and he got better, but he was entitled to that full amount. Right? So you see over here that you do make an assessment because you assess how long he's going to be sick, how long you have to pay him for time off from work and for damages. So Gemara says that's not a proof. L'meimed Gavra, to figure out, to assess the person, how long he will be laid up, how long he won't be able to work and how long he'll be needed in the hospital. How much he will be laid up, how much he will be in bed because of this wound, or or how much he won't be, when he will be healthy. And certainly we assess the person to see how much money he needs, how much time off he needs from work, his bills, etc. That for sure you figure it out. The question is to assess the weapon. The weapon could be a fist, it could be a knife, it could be a bow and arrow, it could be whatever it is, a stone. But that's what the question is. does that need an assessment or not? Or do you say, listen, damage done can be any amount. You can't figure out how that could be. Even a small thing could be an assessment, even any amount. It doesn't have to be assessed. It doesn't have to be assessed. That's our question. Tashma. Shimon said we had this yesterday. Just like the fist is, right, Michael, unique. That's a good word. Miyuchad, it's unique. Shemasu le'edim, that it's given over to the assembly, meaning to the court and to the witnesses. They could check it out. Remember, he said that you have to give it to the court too. Rabbi Kiva said, what do you mean? Everything is going to come to the court? It might be whatever the damage was done, some building far away, or the building's not here anymore. It's got to be just the Adam could check it out. But anyway, Shimon says, just like the fist can be brought to court, right? You bring the mazik to court and you check out his fist. Anything which is unique, it's got to be something which is unique and that they can be checked out. So obviously, you see, you have to be able to check out the weapon. So the answer to the question was yes, a weapon needs assessment as well as the person, as well as the person who was damaged. So he said over here that if they assessed him that he was going to be, let's say, laid up for 10 weeks, and then he got healthy before, it's his gain. He's paid for the full 10 weeks of hospital bills, etc., and time off from work. And if he got better, that's so be it. He gets the gain. Those lokomashim, they still give him everything that he was assessed. Let's say he was assessed that he would be out of work for a day. He was sick or whatever, something happened to him, assessed for a day. This and he improved, he recovered after half a day, and he showed up for work after lunch. Of course, they have lunch first, right? Then he showed up for work after lunch and worked the second half day. And he does his work. But they still give him for the whole day. Why? Heaven had mercy on him and said, you know what? You're a good boy, even though you're paid for the whole day. You still get even though you're working half a day, you still get paid for the whole day, because the wound the wound that you had absorbed really was worthy of a whole day, being off from work and doctor's bills, etc., all that stuff. So this guy knew how to work the system, right? Rakak, the Mishnah said, let's say you spit at you. So the Mishnah said, how much do you pay for embarrassing somebody by spitting? So it says Rakak b'gia roka, and the spit reached the person. You pay 400 zuz. That's a big amount that you pay for the shame. This is we say that if the spit reached him, right? But not, that's only if it hit him on his face and it's hit on his person, but on his clothing, not. So why isn't it any worse than embarrassing him by words? Embarrassing somebody by statement. We know that if you embarrass somebody is worthy of death. That's like killing him. I'm Rav Mishmeid Rav Yosef Baravin Zosamaris. You don't pay for that. Maybe it's like Rav Minay, not really, because you don't kill somebody. Court doesn't kill somebody for embarrassing. A Baruch Shalom will take him. Embarrassing somebody is a terrible sin, but you're not paid for that. So he says that. So therefore, the Mishnah says that if you spit at him, you have to pay this amount. So obviously, Gemara said that's only if you hit him on his person, not on his clothing. Clothing, it's embarrassing, but you don't pay for that. It's no worse than, no different than embarrassing with words. So the Mishnah said, you pay, 100 for this, a seller for this, 100 for this, 400 for that. And then the Mishnah said, it all depends according to his honor. Now, what does that mean? When he says that, is he being lenient, or is he being machmer? L'kula kamar, did he mean l'kula the ikani de la boy the mishkul? Maybe he's saying, listen, it depends on the honor. The $400 that we're talking about is only a hush of a person of importance, right? An honored person, but not a poor person. Maybe he would get less. And therefore, meaning the amounts listed in the Mishnah on Aleph are maybe the maximum amounts that you give the most honored person. Those are the amounts you give him, 100 or 400, whatever it was. But a person of a lower status, maybe you give him less. Or maybe it's or maybe he was giving minimal amounts, that you pay 400 for a lowly person, but a hush of a person you pay even more. Wealthy person who is honored, maybe even more. So Tashma, so you can prove it from Rabbi Kiva. Rabbi Kiva disagreed with the Tanakh. Even a poor person among the Jews, if they are free persons who lost their money. In other words, we're all b'nei malachim and we're chashiv. And he says, and what did Rabbi Kiva say? You pay the 400. Remember, he brought down the story. And it was a story that the guy uncovered a woman's hair, and then Rabbi Kiva said, pay him the 400, and he says, give me a little time. And then he went and he showed that the woman had no self-respect herself. She took off her head covering to save, get a little oil in the street. And that was the story there. And still, it was only 400. So what do you see? Rabbi Akiva was the one who said, even when Yisrael gets to 400. Shmamina, Tanakama Lakula Kamar Shmamina. We see over here, Shmamina, Tanakama Lakula Kamar, that the Tanakama was saying, being Makel, meaning he was saying that Ikani, that those are maximum amounts. That Tanakama was saying the maximum amounts is 400. But Lakula, if it was a poor person, he'd get even less. It comes along Rabbi Akiva say, no, even a poor person gets to 400. So you see from Rabbi Akiva's words and the story with the woman shows you that the Tanakama was being makel, and it was the amounts that the Tanakama gave were maximum amounts, but poor people would get even less. Again, it's a difficult thing to say, even though we don't pass the Rabbi Akiva in this case, it's difficult to say that, poor people are less honored than wealthy people, than chashva people, rabbanim, whatever. Shouldn't we all be? We're living in an equal society, right? Where everything's supposed to be equal, huh? Equity, right? Everybody should be equal, but you see that there are different amounts and different measures. When it comes to libel and things of those sorts in courts, they do determine based on the person. Trump's got to pay 83 million, but not everybody else. Depends on the guy, depends on the status, etc. Both on the damager and the one who has been wounded. My special parvisha, that story with him, yeah.
Spitting on someone. What about the nezek? If he spits, he only ruins his clothes. His clothes needs to be
okay. So then, right, then he'd have to pay. That's straight damages. That's right. Here we're talking about paying for shame, for embarrassment. We're not talking about damage. If you damage somebody, anything, you damage somebody's clothing, you have to pay. So what was the story? The story was that a man had taken off a woman's head covering. Rav Akiva said, pay her the 400. Right? Even an ani should be so. Even though she was a poor person, pay her the 400. And as Rabbi Akiva's being machmer. He's saying that, again, we determined that the Tanakama said 400 is the maximum for wealthy people. But Rabbi Akiva says no. Even a poor person is deserving of the 400. Right? So the guy said, okay, can you give me some time to pay? Give me some time. So he waited a few days, and he was able to demonstrate that the woman had no self-respect. And he came back and he told Rabbi Akiva, look, this woman has no self-respect. Why should I pay her? So the question is, do you give him time? If Rabbi Akiva paskin, you have to pay for me. Do you give him time to pay? When it comes to damage, you don't pay. You don't give him time. Whether there's time to pay, you a payment plan over here, an installment plan? You did damage, you got to pay right now. Yes, when there's a loss of money. For example, you damage somebody, they've got to go to the hospital and pay the doctor, etc. And they are off from work and they lost their thing, they've lost money. But if we're only talking about the embarrassment, where she didn't have any monetary loss, you give them some time. Okay. And then what happened? He saw her standing by her door. And what happened? And she, and she took off, and he spilled some little oil in the street and showed that she took off her head covering just to put some oil on her head and showed that she was a lowly person. He came and claimed to Rabbi Akiva. Right? What did Rabbi Akiva say? Rabbi Akiva says, you have no claim at all. Lo matter klum. Why? Because even though you can damage yourself, but you're not if you damage yourself, even though you're not supposed to damage yourself, but you're potter, you don't have to pay anything. You don't inflict any punishment if you damage you're not supposed to. But if somebody else did damage you, they have to pay. If you cut down your own tree, you're not supposed to. But if somebody else does it, if you cut it down, you don't pay anything. But if somebody else does, you have to pay. The Gemara now says, you dove into deep water, but all you picked up was a shard. Meaning, all right, you went to this whole rigmarole to prove that she had no self-respect, but you didn't get anything. Why? You didn't get anything. Why? Because Adam Rishoy l'chavatzmo. She's entitled to injure herself, but you're not entitled to injure her. But what do you see over here? That a person is entitled to hurt himself. That's the issue over here. In our Mishnah, the words were, what did Rabbi Akiva say? Even though you're not allowed to damage yourself. The pasuk says you're not allowed to hurt somebody. You can't draw blood. You can't hurt somebody. Okay, does that apply to yourself also? You're not allowed to damage yourself. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Akiva said, even though you're not allowed to damage yourself, but if you damage yourself, you're potter. Who are you supposed to pay? You're not. We don't give you a fine or anything like that. But if other people damage you, they have to pay. So the same thing over here. Even though she can embarrass herself, even though she shouldn't, but if she does, that's her business. You can't be responsible. If you damage her, if you shame her, you have to pay. But over here, the other Brisa says the story is brought down differently. That Rabbi Kiva said, a person is allowed to damage yourself. So that's the question over here. Is a person allowed to damage yourself or not? Our Mishnah said you can't. But even though it's also to do, if you did it, you don't have to pay. And here Rabbi Kiva said you're allowed to damage yourself. What was it? What was the dialogue? What Rabbi Kiva said? Amar Rava lo kasha. No. When it comes to damaging, physical damaging, hurting yourself, cutting yourself, whatever, that you're also to do. But for embarrassing yourself, that you're allowed to do. But you're allowed to. You could do it to yourself, and nobody else can do. But our Mishnah is talking about boshes. We're not talking about damage. We're talking about only shame. The chobel that we're talking about in our Mishnah is shame. We're not talking about physical damage, right? And it says even though you're not allowed to, you're potter. So how could the Bryce over there say that you're allowed to embarrass yourself? This is what he means to say. Love me, boy, boshes. No, there's no question about shame. That's where you can shame yourself. That was what Kiva said in the second brisa. She could shame herself, but you can't shame her. When the Mishnah said, it doesn't mean boshes where you're allowed to. Let me boy boshes. Even physical damage. You're not allowed to. You can't do it. Says more of okay, so now we're saying that everybody agrees you can't. Both Bryces agree you can't damage yourself. Question is, you're allowed to shame yourself. So the second Bryce says you're allowed to shame yourself. In our Mishnah, it said you're not allowed to. It's saying that even though you could shame yourself, you're allowed to, but you can't damage yourself, even though it's usher. But you're not chayav anything. And if somebody else does damage to you, they're chayav. But is that really true? You're not allowed to damage yourself if you want to. But Tanya, we learned. Let's say you swear that you're going to harm yourself. Let's say you swear you're going to. And you didn't do it. Maybe you're potter because damaging yourself is not right anyway. So you swear to harm or to do good. Just like you're allowed to do something good, you're allowed to do something bad too. So therefore I'm bringing, if you swear that you're going to harm yourself, that you're chayav, right? You're chayav. So what do you see? You're allowed to damage yourself. How do you say you're not allowed to damage yourself? See over here, you could swear that if you swear to harm yourself and you don't do it, you're chayav because you're allowed to. No, talking about damaging yourself, but you're going to sit in the fasting. You can't fast all the time. You're going to sit and fast all the time. That's damaging yourself. So the so what do you mean? That means that you swear that you're allowed to, that you're going to be in a fast, that you're going to harm yourself, that you're allowed to fast that way. You're allowed to harm yourself. What about damaging somebody else? That you're not allowed to, because the Gemara says that you're allowed to do what you're allowed to do to yourself. You can't do to others. If I swear I'm going to hurt myself and I don't hurt myself, meaning I swear I'm going to fast, I'm not going to fast, and I don't fast, I'm chayiv. Does that mean also if I swear I'm going to make somebody else fast, I'm also chayiv if I don't cause them to do it? I'm going to force somebody else. How can you say we're talking about fasting? Can I force somebody else to fast? I could. I lock him up in a room. I tie him into a room, and I could force him to fast that way. Tanya. So maybe we're talking about fasting. We're not talking about physical damage. Meaning, we say you're not allowed to damage yourself. You see you could damage yourself. Maybe that's only when it comes to fasting. Tanya, we learn. In other words, you're allowed to damage yourself, but you can't damage somebody else. We're talking about fasting. And what is damaging somebody else? Akaploni, I'm going to smite him. I'm going to strike him. I'll split his brain open. I'll split his head open. So you see over here, we're talking about physical damage that you can't do to somebody else. Not what you could do to yourself. You could do this. We're not talking about fasting. Some say you're not allowed to damage yourself, which is the halacha. Some say you're allowed to. When it says lahara lahated, I swear I'm going to harm myself and I don't, I'm chayiv. Talking about like the sheet that says you're allowed to harm yourself physically. Who's the one who says you're not allowed to physically harm yourself? Hashem said in Bashas, right? I will seek your blood. I was for your souls. I will seek you. Meaning, if you murder or even suicide, from your soul I will seek your blood. Right? So maybe over there we're saying that if you damage even yourself committing suicide, Hashem is going to hold you responsible. So you see, you're not allowed to damage yourself. It's different when you're killing. When it comes to murder or suicide, Maybe there we're talking about that you're not allowed to. But how do we know about damage? How do we know you're allowed to damage? You're allowed to you're allowed to tear your garments on a mace. Not simply the creed that we do l'shem mitzvah, but you're allowed to tear your garments, rent your garments in mourning. It's not considered a goyish minig, even the goyim did that. If you do too much, that's already, you get malchus for destruction, because that's unnecessary destruction. But kol shkein gufo, if you get malchus for destroying clothing, certainly for damaging yourself, if you cut yourself or something in mourning, you'd be chayiv. You'd be chayiv. So maybe it's that shita. This shita, and as we're trying to say, Rav Elazar was talking about suicide. That's drawing blood. Killing. You're killing yourself. What about damages? It says, Rav Elazar says, I heard that if you tear your garments too much in mourning, you get malchus. Certainly, goof. So maybe it's different with clothing. Why? It's something that can't be reversed. If you tear your garments, they can't be reversed. He said he called his clothing mechadusa, my honorers, the ones who honor me. Person's clothes honor him. So clothing is different. You tear your clothes, that's Bal Tashkas. Rav Chisda, when Rav Chisda was walking among thorns and thistles, when he would lift up his clothes so they shouldn't be torn by the thorns. My feet will heal, right? My feet can heal if I get scratched, but the clothing won't heal. So maybe it's different when it comes to clothing. When it comes to clothing, where you're destroying things. You tear your clothing, you're destroying it. It can't be reversed. So maybe there you get malchus, but maybe for wounds, maybe not. So maybe that's not a problem. Maybe you could. So how do we know who's the shita? Who's the author of this idea that you're not allowed to damage yourself physically? He was called the Rebbe, like he was a chashuv rabbi. When it comes to Nazir, and the Nazir brings his karbanos, etc., after he finishes, it says he will atone for the one who sinned on his soul. Whose soul did he sin for? He troubled himself, right? He pained himself. He suffered from not drinking wine. They didn't have Diet Coke in those days. All they had was wine. So if you didn't drink wine, you didn't have much to drink. The water was dirty, right? So he's mitzvah. This guy only prevented himself, and he suffered from not drinking wine. Is considered a sinner. If you don't eat anything, Rashi says, you're talking about Mikodava, I'm talking about if you stay in fasting all the time, certainly that's wounding, and certainly then physical damage. In other words, fasting constantly is physical damage, even though we say fasting on occasion is okay, the Shem Shemayim, but basically if you fast all the time, that's can harm your body. And therefore, it was very common for, I think my grandfather fasted Monday and Thursdays. That's the Shem Shemayim. He's not doing it all the time, but he's doing it all the time, maybe fasting too much is considered wounding the body. So we have this machlokes. Are you allowed to cause yourself physical pain or not? You certainly can't cause pain to others. Are you allowed? Some say you're allowed to harm yourself, maybe just with fasting, etc. And some say you can't. And then we'd go with this shita that Rav Meir Shapiro famously said that the Nazir, why does he need a kapara? Because Hashem said, enjoy the wine. I gave you wine and you held yourself back. So you're mitzvah yourself. That's considered a sinner. Hashem gave you this to enjoy, and you sinned by not taking advantage of it. So mitzvah koldover certainly is considered a sinner. Let's say you cut down your own trees. You're not allowed to. So it's also, but if you did, you're part of it. If somebody else cut down your trees, I have to pay. Tani Rav Rachana Kamed Rav. Sharia Rakta, a story like this. A man says, Reuben says to Shimon, you killed my shore. You cut down my plants, my trees. The guy answered him. Shimon said, Atamatli logo. You told me to kill him. You told me to cut it down. What do you want from me? You told me to do it. I was doing you a favor. Putter. Shimon is putter. You're not leaving anybody alive. You believe the other guy? And the guy says, hey, you killed my shore. He says, you told me to do it. And Shimon gets off by saying, you told me to do it? How could that be? He's believed just because he says, you told me to do it. That gets him off the hook. Should I erase that brisa? Rav Rachana learned this brisa with this story. He says, you killed my shore, or you knocked down my tree. He says, you told me to do it. He gets off the hook. He says, that doesn't make any sense. Should I erase that brisa? Amalei lo. I'll explain that brisa does work, in which case, a shore who was sentenced to death. was supposed to be killed anyway. Or Elon or Meliktisa, or a tree that was either bothering the public had to be cut down, or it was a tree that used on a shaver tree that had to be cut down. We're talking about things like that, where the owner had to kill the shore, or had to have the shore killed, or the tree was supposed to be removed anyway. So what's the claim? What's Reuben claiming? You killed my shore, you cut down my tree. It has to be done anyway. I wanted to do the mitzvah. The time they were shuffle v'kisa, right? That when it comes to the avoda, or he spilled the blood and he covered up the blood, the one who pulled it out should cover it up. It was the person who shechted the animal. The other person did kisi adam. Made him pay because you took away my mitzvah. I was supposed to do the mitzvah and you took it away from me. So that's what his complaint was. His claim was that I was supposed to cut down the tree or kill the animal, and you took it away from me. So in that case, when the guy says, yeah, but you told me to do it, we believe him. Why do we believe him? Because not such a big deal. It's possible that he did say to the other guy, my animal has to be killed, or take him to the court to kill him, or my tree should be cut down. Maybe he did tell him to do it, because since it was set to be killed or knocked down anyway, so maybe he told him, yeah, you do it for me, and he forgot and he told him about it. So we believe the guy who did it. But in a regular case, if I have a shore and I say you killed my shore, I evade him. The guy says you told me to do it. We don't believe in some in a case like that without proof. Amarav Dikla the ton cover, talking about trees that should or should not be cut down. If you have a palm tree that bears even, let's say, a kav that's a measure of fruits, also you can't cut it down because it's a fruit bearing tree. You're not allowed to cut down fruit bearing trees. Meisvei, how much should an olive tree hold? In other words, how much it's going to produce? You shouldn't cut it down. Rova, only a quarter of a cup, much less. So is it a kav or a rova cup? So shiny zayis mechashivi. Olives are different. Olives are worth more. You make olive oil from them. So if an olive tree, if it bears, or it can bear even a quarter of a kav, that's enough to keep it from being cut down. But a palm tree, if it has less than a kav, you can cut it down. Amar Flina, lo shachav shichas bri. It's the question what his name is actually called, but Flina said that his own son died because he cut down a fig tree before its time while it was still producing. Amar Ravina, but let's say the wood was worth more. The wood sometimes is worth more than the fruits. You can use the wood for construction. If it was mudam mutter, so Pasuk talks about in Dvarim, when you come to lay siege to a city, you shouldn't cut down the fruit trees. But it says rak eitz asher teda, that ze'ilin machel. It's a fruit tree. Kilo eitz machel, if it's not a fruit tree, ze'ilin strak. That's a wild tree, a tree that doesn't grow fruits. So that you're allowed to cut down. So there's a pashut of the pasuk is only a tree that doesn't bear fruit. You're allowed to cut down. Otherwise, you can't cut it down. But he's darshing rak eitz asher teda, even a fruit bearing tree. And then he says, kilo eitz machel, even a non-fruit tree. If you're going to say you can cut down any tree, because we're saying, let's say, like Rashi explains, even an eitz machel, that if there's no other tree around there and you need to cut it down, you can cut it down. You're allowed to cut it down if you need to cut it down for laying siege, etc. What's the point of saying a non-fruit bearing tree you can cut down? You can cut down any tree if you need to. In other words, if there's more than one tree, if there's one wild tree and there's one fruit bearing tree, cut down the wild tree and not the fruit bearing tree. I might think. So this is the point that we're saying at that Ravina said if the wood is worth more than the fruits, even if it's worth more money, the wood is worth more money. Also, there you say that you should give preference to cutting down the wild tree rather than the fruit bearing tree, even though the fruit bearing tree's wood is worth more. No, we exclude it. This is we say you do the wild tree first. That's only if it doesn't have if the wood is not worth, the wood of the fruit bearing tree is not worth more. But if the fruit bearing tree is worth a lot and it's worth, then you can cut that down. Shmuel Tamri. Shmuel, his sharecropper, brought him some dates. Oh, he tasted the dates. Talmud Tamid Chamra tasted some wine. The dates had a taste of wine. Why does it have a taste of wine? Because this date tree, right? He brought him some dates. He says this date tree, this palm tree, is among the vines, among the vines, the grapevines, and therefore it got the taste of the wine. If it's ruining, in other words, if the two things are near each other and that's ruining the wine or the grapevines, which will ruin the wine. That's no good. And next day, he says, bring me the roots of this palm tree. In other words, I want you to cut it down. Why? Because even though you're not allowed to cut down trees, but if they're causing more damage by being there because it's ruining the vines, then you're allowed to. Similarly, Rav Chisda Chaza Talibah, he saw a palm tree among the vines. He told his sharecropper, uproot it. Gufni kani dikli. With vines, I can buy plenty of palm trees. Dikli kani gufni. But palm trees are worth much less. They can't buy vines. And therefore, you see that even though you're not allowed to cut a fruit-bearing tree down, under certain circumstances, when you're laying seeds, you're allowed to. Or if the tree is worth more money, the wood is worth more money than the fruits, then you're allowed to. All right, we'll pick it up from the Mishnah tomorrow, Mitzvah Shem, on Daf Sadik Beis. Have a good day, everybody.